Good evening. It is 5:32. Welcome to the March 3rd, 2026 special meeting of the Cupertino City Council. I call this meeting to order. Madam City Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Councilmember Fruin?
Here.
Councilmember Mohan?
Here.
Councilmember Wong?
Here.
Vice Mayor Chow?
Here.
Mayor Moore?
Here.
And Mayor, Vice Mayor, and council members, as a reminder, Councilmember Wong is participating remotely this evening. Councilmember Wong, are you in the lobby of the Boca Raton Resort in Boca Raton, Florida this evening?
Yes, I am.
Thank you. And Councilmember Wong, are there any individuals over the age of 18 with you? And has anyone indicated to you that they intend to make public comment or address the council?
No one so far to date.
Okay, thank you. I'll rely on you to notify me if any member of the public does wish to speak from your location. Thank you so much.
Right. Thank you, Madam City Clerk. Our first item is the action calendar, item 1, and the subject is the Parkland ballot measure. Madam City Manager, do we have a staff report?
Thank you, Mayor. So this item follows the study session that was held in January regarding potential parkland protections and rezoning considerations, where council directed staff to return with additional information related to mapping, zoning consistency, legal protections under state law, and the logistical and fiscal considerations associated with placing a measure on the ballot for November 2026. And tonight's staff report summarizes that information, outlines the considerations for council as you determine whether to move forward with the development of a parkland ballot measure. We do not have a presentation, but we have a short verbal update from Jonathan Orozco, Acting Director of Admin Services for this item, and I will turn it over to Jonathan.
Thank you, Tina. Good evening, Honorable Mayor Moore and council members. As outlined in the staff report, this item responds to council's direction from the January study session. The staff report provides an overview of the current mapping and zoning framework, summarizes existing state law protections for parkland, and outlines the election timing and estimated fiscal considerations should council wish to pursue a measure for the November 2026 ballot. Rather than walking through each section in detail this evening, I encourage you to reference the staff report for the full legal and logistical analysis. Ultimately, tonight's discussion is intended to help council determine whether to direct staff to proceed with the development of a ballot measure or take no further action at this time. This concludes my presentation, and staff is available to respond to any questions.
Okay, thank you. We've allocated a brief amount of time for this agenda item. I'll be opening it up first for public comment. Madam City Clerk, do we have any speakers on this item?
Yes. Yes, Mayor. We have, at this current time, we have three requests to speak in person on this item, and I'm seeing one hand raised virtually. So just a reminder, members of the public wishing to speak regarding an item shall submit a request to speak card or raise their hand virtually within 9 minutes of the start of public comment or before the public comment period is closed, whichever comes first. So we'll move into Community Hall speakers. First, we have Jennifer Griffin, followed by Jean Bedord, followed by Peggy Griffin. Welcome, Jennifer.
And can video allocate 90 seconds per speaker on this item due to the 15 minutes we have allocated towards it?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Don't start my time. Okay, is this on?
It's on, yes.
Okay, sorry. I will speak really, really quickly. This item is extremely important. I have multiple Zooms that I participate in this week that are all over the state, and they pertain to housing issues, state laws with housing, and we have people from San Diego up to Shasta, Humboldt, etc. And I have heard ruminations about issues about Parkland, so I was not surprised when this item showed up in January. And if you all weren't familiar, Post, one of the big nonprofits that purchase land, bought, I don't know if it was a Sargent Ranch, but they just bought a huge piece of property that is going to be a gateway between San Jose and Santa Cruz. We want this to continue. We need more breathing room. And I have seen so many threats to parkland that we have the developer, I'm sorry, I'm not going to blame the developers, but the Wienerbills, all of them are trying to not have parkland. And I think that that is a really, really bad plan. And we need to make sure that everything that we have in this city that is going to be a park is locked down. Also, I'm concerned about Cali Mill, Franco, and the Main Street property. We don't own them, but they could be built on. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Next, we have Jean Bedord. Welcome, Jean.
Good evening. My name is Jean Bedord, and I am a Cupertino resident. I'm speaking tonight to urge you to vote no on this ballot measure. It would be a waste of taxpayer money to move forward on this item. Our parklands are already protected by state laws. The city does not need to provide an additional level of questionable protection, particularly when this ballot measure would cost over $300,000 with no immediate benefit to our residents. While I agree with the public comment urging zoning modifications for some of our parkland, this can be done with a separate zoning cleanup in the future. There's no need whatsoever to move forward with a very expensive ballot measure. This council has two priorities. The first is funding for our public safety officers. The second is the no net loss noncompliance, the next agenda item. This funding is much higher priority than this ballot measure. I urge council to be fiscally responsible and vote no on this item. Don't waste residents' money on this ballot measure. It makes no sense in this fiscally challenged time. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean. Next, we have Peggy Griffin. Welcome, Peggy.
Hi, can I use the overhead?
Yes.
Okay. Good evening, council, staff. I'm in favor of doing this. Definitely for everything Parkland. I'm not sure about the facilities. I would prefer facilities included, but that could get a little dicey. First, I'd like this cleanup, if you could show. Okay, this is Creekside Park, and
It's
it
really-
used to be Creekside Elementary, and so it still has residual elementary school zoning and land use. So that needs to be fixed.
So, sorry, Peggy, it's really frozen, or, sorry, blurry, so we're going to pause your time for a second.
I'm not getting any focus on it. Sorry. Okay. I'm sorry. I'm not sure why it's out of zoom, out of focus. Never seen it out of focus. So. Might do the same thing. I could try to do it on
That's
that.
how you do it. I think it just taps the screen.
I used to have it.
There.
Okay.
Perfect.
All right, thank you. They'll need it later anyway. Creekside Park, cleanup. Franco Park, cleanup. Library Field, break it up into 2 parcels, change it to PR, both the land use and the zoning. Also, remember that we have Torrey Avenue. It's not even zoned right as a city facility that needs to be fixed. And if you can, include facilities and parks. Thank you.
Thank you, Peggy. Next, Mayor, we will move to the request to speak virtually. I see one hand raised. Welcome, San.
Good evening, Mayor Moore, council members. I'm a planning commissioner speaking on behalf of myself only. I urge you to vote for the Parkland ballot measure. I further urge you to expand the Parkland ballot measure to term it as parkland and recreational facilities at a minimum, or to go even further and term it as parkland, recreational, and city facilities. At a minimum, it must include the Cupertino Sports Center and the Blackberry Farm Golf Course. We've already seen what transpired with the Cupertino Sports Center in 2023, if not for the votes of our current mayor, Kitty Moore, our last year's mayor, Liang Chow, and our prior late mayor, Hung Wei, that Cupertino Sports Center would have been gone by now. So I urge you to please include the sports center. I urge you to also make sure that the ballot measure is worded to require a vote of not just 2/3 of council, but also 2/3 of residents. So let's have a dual safeguard for this. This is an extremely important thing. Finally, for all of those saying that there are state laws, we're seeing how well the state laws work in favor of residents when we're trying to vacate a public right-of-way. If the city wants to do something, it will happen. And therefore, let's not leave it to a 3-2 majority. Please change the majority to 2/3. Please change it to require a vote and follow the footsteps of Milpitas and I believe it's Santa Clara or another city there. But thank you for acting on this today.
Thank you, San. Mayor, that concludes the request to speak on this item.
All right, thank you very much. Bringing it back to council, I'd kind of like to take a straw poll to get a sense for, because of the length of time that we have is so brief, that if we have general support towards this potential ballot measure amongst the council members at this time. So would the council members please indicate if you are in support of this at this time, and then we can have some further deliberations and questions about it. So I'm in favor of it. Vice Mayor.
I think the state law does provide some protection, but the protection is limited a lot of times by the council majority. And as the example we have seen in Mary Avenue, even when there is a strong resistance from the community, but if there is a council majority to support vacate of city property or even sale of a land, it could still happen. So I think it makes sense if we can provide stronger, maybe like a supermajority support to make sure any such change is really have stronger support by the council.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Fruin?
So under current state law, any member of the public could trigger via objection the requirement of an election. So I think it's a very different process from the Surplus Land Act declarations or the vacation of a public right-of-way. I am concerned about the amount of cost given what our budget outlook looks like. At a minimum, if we do proceed with this, given that I expect that it would be rather popular just as a general concept, I don't know that we need to proceed with things like polling. That seems like a waste of money. So to the extent that we can constrain the cost of it, I think that's valuable. And to look at whether we could have a new sui generis zoning designation for recreational facilities that would also then allow us to adopt the same framework. Like I said, I have some trepidation about the cost just given where we are, and I think that we could also solve that with a rezoning.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Mohan.
Yeah. Thank you, Mayor. While I would oppose any conversion of parkland to any other use in concept, I think in this case there are enough guardrails to make sure that this process is difficult to do, if not impossible. My other consideration is, yours was like a two-part question. Do you support this at this time? And I say, in general, I do support it, but not at this time. I don't see any imminent threat of any conversion. I don't see any issue related to this sort of percolating. And I don't think this is the right time because, as the staff report indicates, it costs about $350,000 to get this right, to put it on the ballot and so on. So I'm not sure there's any urgency in doing this at this time.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Wong.
I would only support this measure if we included the facilities. Now is the time to do something. It's not the time to waste. We shouldn't wait till another point in time to try to save land, parkland. This is like the same issue we had when we had retail. Not saving retail in advance has been a detriment to our sales tax revenue. Not saving this parkland is a detriment to our future quality of life. As land becomes more scarce, we've got to take the foresight and have the foresight to protect those lands and protect that quality of life for our residents. So if you include the facilities in there, you'll have my support.
Okay, thank you. So it looks like we have 3 council members who are generally in support of it. We have a 4th that is insisting that facilities be included, and then our 5th council member is not quite ready at this time. Would that be an adequate summation? Councilmember Fruin?
So that sounds like a reasonable summation. I would just say one way or the other that correcting the zoning seems like it would be a good thing to do, even if we weren't to proceed, and that would be a mechanism by which a number of sites could enjoy state law protections that our regular parklands currently enjoy.
Thank you. I agree. Madam City Attorney, how can we move the zoning corrections item onto our agenda?
I think you could direct staff to bring something back on that front.
Okay, so I believe that is our direction. Or, yeah. Councilmember
Through the
Fruin?
mayor?
Yes. Councilmember Wong?
Through the mayor, are we rescinding the idea of a ballot measure here?
No, we're beginning with, we would like to have the zoning corrections made because if you look at all of the parkland sites throughout the city, you'll see that some, like the Monte Vista Rec Center, it includes the structures as well as the parkland around it. When you get over to Creekside Park, that one's a little bit unusual, whereas only part of the whole complex is designated parkland only. The building's not included in it, so we have some inconsistencies about that. So this would be a way that we can correct that, and that all of our facilities are using the same consistent zoning. Councilmember.
Okay. So to be clear, we're cleaning up the designations.
First part.
We're also proposing a ballot measure at some point in time. Is there a deadline as to when we have to propose this ballot measure by?
Yes. Would staff care to answer that?
Yeah, so at this time, we would pursue the consultant to provide a more definite deadlines. And so as there's a handful in June and in July that we would have to return to council to refine some of those, in August, and refine the language in the ballot before it's sent to council to the county for their approval. But before then, will be several check-in points to develop that language, have council buy-in, and then also to your point, Council Mayor Fruin, we can refine what the consultant will be performing, whether not to pursue polling and just move into community outreach.
Right, and for instance, if you would like to do some research, Measure K 2016 from Milpitas was very simply written, which I think makes it a lot easier for people at the polls. They had a very simply written parkland ballot measure, and it passed. It was like 85%. Is that correct? It was very successful.
85%.
Yeah. So I agree and really appreciate the idea to reduce the polling on this one and try to have cost-saving measures. I think that's really smart. Vice Mayor.
Yeah, so the total cost estimate is 300,000, and if we don't need to do the polling, how much will be what's the cost just to put it on the ballot? I think it was,
The county cost is estimated at 150.
yeah.
So that's essentially the floor. The consultant, depending on how much outreach we want them to perform, obviously the height or the ceiling there would be up to $200,000. But I don't see it if we want to forego polling, which is the more costly bit, or the outreach. If we're going to be sending out postcards and whatnot, the postage is quite expensive. So if we can limit what outreach we perform and how we perform that, we can drastically decrease the cost.
Okay.
In addition, maybe I could just add that the Parkland measure is much more straightforward from a legal perspective as well, as opposed to a revenue a revenue measure of some kind. So I think whatever our estimate was on the legal fees, it would be substantially lower.
Yeah, and I would like to say that from having participated in city council things since 2015, then we realized that whenever every time it feels like the council is not going to do anything right away, but by the time the community finds out there is going to be something happening, it's almost always too late. So the argument that there is not an imminent threat, well, as long as it's possible, then there could, by the time we find out the community doesn't have enough voice that's represented by the council, is often too late. And the 5 council members, every election, every 2 years, it changes. So does it always represent the entire community? It's hard to say at any point of time. So I do support that. We want to be sure the voice of the voters always have a control on the land, the permanent property the city owns. And the cost in the long-term run is not really that much.
Okay, thank you. So within the staff report, if council elects to proceed, staff will return with a recommended scope of work for consultant services, a proposed budget appropriation, a detailed work plan and timeline outlining polling. So we are considering not having the polling, so that would be within that. Outreach, ballot language development, and required council actions, along with, I'd like some language regarding if we were to include facilities and if that would cause the ballot measure to not pass if it's written. We need to see how it's written and if it causes any issues with that. So that seems pretty clear. Councilmember Mohan?
I wanted to repeat, Mayor, that there doesn't seem to be any urgency to do this. Why do we have to put it on the ballot measure this November? In anticipation of sort of problems that may come up. We have enough challenges as it is, and we have a budget problem. And it's not just the budget; it's staff time and everyone else's time. We have several things that we need to resolve this fiscal year, and to put something like this. While I'm not opposed to, like I said, not converting Parkland to any other use, there just doesn't seem to be any urgency to do this year. Thank you.
All right, Anne, thank you. And for me, it's really the reign of state laws that we've had, and we have had so many things changed in the past few years that I do think that we need to rely on our own local rules as much as possible. So this will help address that. So we're coming in a little bit behind on this item. Should we have a vote on our direction?
Through the mayor, real quick.
Yes, Councilmember Wong?
I just want to point out that it's really important for us to put something like this on the ballot now in advance. It's forethought. We had a situation where we almost lost the Cupertino Sports Center, and I remember Council Member Mohan helping to save that. And I think these things can happen at any point in time. So it's very important that we do put this on the ballot measure, even if it doesn't seem like it's imminent or at this point, because $150,000 to $300,000 versus losing valuable parkland we could never purchase again in the millions of dollars per acre is a very small investment.
Okay, thank you. Vice Mayor?
Yeah. I think this should have been probably included in the staff report presentation, but I'm quoting from the staff report. Both Milpitas and the Santa Clara now requires a 2/3 vote of the electorate to permit the transition of parkland within their city to non-park uses. Moreover, neither process requires an initial public protest to an already formulated city council action, which is also a requirement under the current state law. So the so-called guardrail that currently exists in the state law does allow a public member to protest if a council decides to transition parkland, but so that this measure will be put on the ballot. However, once it's put on the ballot, it only requires a simple majority. And if we model this after Milpitas, such transition of land would require 2/3 majority of the electorate, not just the council. So it really gives the power to the electorate, and it does not require a public protest in order to put it on the ballot. So, and then this makes this entire process more transparent, and so that we really have public engagement. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Fruin.
Yeah, just for the record, since there seems to be some confusion both in the public and on council, that when the matter of the sports center came to council, the vote to exclude the sports center and any sort of move on it was unanimous.
All right, thank you. And I believe that concludes item 1 and that staff has adequate direction from the council. All right.
Yes, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. So next we move on to our study session. Item 2, it's with regards to options related to the no net loss law, SB 166. Madam City Manager, do we have a staff report?
Thank you, Mayor. We do have a staff report, and we also have a presentation. So this item focuses on the issue of no net loss related to the city's recent housing element update. And staff also issued an info memo about a month ago on this topic, and tonight's discussion is a follow-up on that. I will now turn it over to Ben Fu, Director of Community Development, and Luke Connolly, Assistant Director of Community Development, to provide the presentation.
Okay, thank you, City Manager, and good evening, Mayor and Council members. I'll try to jump into this. Not sure if my screen is showing up yet, but in any event, we do have a kind of brief, high overview presentation of the topic. I don't know, I'm assuming this should be up on the screen. It doesn't appear to be. Okay, there we go. Thank you. So the topic tonight, we've got the familiar housing element logo back before you, which you've seen a lot of, but tonight specifically we're talking about the issue of no net loss, which we'll get into in more detail. But what that essentially refers to is a situation where your housing element capacity is no longer adequate for each income category. So with that, we can now get into this. Tonight, I want to provide a little bit of background on the housing element. I'm sure many people here are familiar with it, so we can go over that fairly quickly, but I think it's important to touch on that again. And the no net loss issue in particular related to the housing element, we're really talking about housing sites and density. It's more of a numbers exercise and an affordability exercise. It's not something that's really dealing with strategies or policy. We'll then go over an overview of no net loss itself, what it's intended to do, how long it's been around, and some strategies for the city to correct this situation that we're now in with no net loss. And we can then end on somewhat related to strategies is some budget considerations going forward to address the issue. Okay, so some background on the housing element. We can go through this, but what this timeline shows really is we spent a lot of work in about 3 years going through the 6th cycle housing element update, as many of you know. Began in late 2021. The first 8 months of 2022, we had a number of public meetings before the City Planning Commission, Housing Commission, and the City Council, which resulted in the identification of sites by the end of August. We then spent February 2023, we submitted our first draft to HCD, which is the state oversight agency for housing law, and spent much of 23 and the first part of 2024 completing our housing element. I think it was the first week of April, we received notice from HCD that our housing element was adequate under state law once we completed the necessary upzoning, creating the housing capacity necessary to meet our RHNA. And that's kind of the focus of what we're talking about tonight. May of 2024, the City Council adopted the housing element. In July, the upzoning was completed, and the first week of September, we received notice from the Housing and Community Development Department that our housing element was in compliance with state law. So when we're talking tonight about what the housing sites and capacity look like, it's kind of that date and time in September that we start from, is when our housing element was certified. The top date is wrong there. It should be 2023 to 2031, but in any event, what we ended up with on our approved housing element is we have 58 individual properties that made up our housing sites inventory. Many of those were adjacent to each other, so it came out to more like 35, 36 actual development sites. This was a huge increase over the previous housing cycle that Cupertino had gone through, specifically because our RHNA was over 4 times as high. The second bullet on this slide, I think, shows where things really departed. Is Cupertino, like much of Santa Clara County, had a much more suburban character. With this housing element cycle, to meet the large RHNA we had, nearly 70%, or 40 of the 58 properties, had a minimum density of 50 units per acre. So it's a significant increase over what you typically think of in a suburban community. 15 of the other sites were in the 20 to 35 range, which was really targeting townhome density. And by far, townhome has been the housing type of preference and really almost exclusively what we're seeing activity in this city. So that really leaves, of the 58 sites, only 3 were still at a suburban type of density and were smaller sites. So this was a big change for the city, as it was with others in the Bay Area. The last bullet is something I don't think we spent a lot of time going through on the housing element, but the sites were fairly equally divided between mixed-use sites where you could have commercial development along with housing, and a little over half were residential-only sites. And the reason I want to point this out is in HCD's determination, mixed-use sites were assumed to be built out at 75% of their maximum capacity, whereas 100% residential sites were assumed to build out at 95%. So this assumption was, if you had a site zoned R3 or R4, it's probably going to build out to the maximum allowed. Now that doesn't factor in a density bonus, but those were the divisions that went into determining what would be anticipated to build out. And I think it's important to note in the housing element, a lot of this is best guess and estimating. So, but that was a factor in determining what unit count we would think we would get on each site. Okay, to now touch on the sites inventory. This is probably the most familiar slide to anybody who sat through the housing element meetings. And essentially that total number at the bottom is the RHNA that was assigned to the city of Cupertino, 4,588 units. Again, it was over 4 times the increase we went through in the previous housing cycle. I think that number really caught a lot of people's attention, and rightfully so. But also the other thing to note, Cupertino, like most of the developed parts of the Bay Area, over 57% of the units identified were in affordable categories, either very low, low, or moderate income. And the important thing to note about that is most communities have BMR requirements that max out at around 20%. Cupertino is in that category as well. For ownership units, you have 20% moderate income requirement. For rental, it's 5% less at 15. So this becomes kind of one of the key tensions in the total number of units is really how do you reach the affordability goals when your BMR can't come anywhere near what your RHNA is requiring. The note below is something we also talked a lot about going through the housing element update of the idea of having a buffer or a percentage in addition to those units. This is not required by HCD. It is strongly recommended, and it's recommended for the reason we're going to be talking about tonight related to no net loss. The recommended buffer was in the 15 to 30% range. And if you looked at the total number of units the city approved, we met that. We had a buffer of about 28%. But where the issue really lies is in looking at these figures, you should sort of think of each income category as its own RHNA, because the units aren't necessarily transferable or meant to be dealt with as a whole. So we can get into that with the next slide. Okay, so the top row is what I just showed. That was the city's RHNA. It comes out to 4588 on the right-hand side. The total capacity is our housing element. That's what was certified by HCD in September. So looking at the total number, the 5881, we exceeded our RHNA with a 28% buffer, which is right where you would like to be. Where the issue comes in is when you look at it by income category. So for purposes of the discussion and the way the housing element is classified, low and very low are seen in one category. You can see our capacity there. We have a surplus of 157 units. For moderate, we had 92 units, whereas above moderate or market rate, we were well over, at over 1,000 unit surplus. So that 28% buffer, if you look at it per category, low comes out to about 8%, moderate about 12%, whereas above moderate is well over 50%. So that's one of the issues why we find ourselves in the no net loss situation right now, is because the low and moderate categories had a very narrow margin. One other factor with this, and I think some of you may remember, was in May of 2024, as we were taking the housing element for council approval, we had a request from a property owner to remove 4 sites that were very high density. So that took 372 units in addition we would have had, with well over half of those in the low and moderate income category. So this was made days before the council's consideration, and that took what was a low surplus in the low and moderate categories and reduced it further. Okay, so now we'll talk about no net loss itself and Senate Bill 166. No net loss goes back over 20 years. It was adopted by the state legislature in 2002. And the intent is always to have that your housing capacity identified in your housing element doesn't dip below what you're saying you can provide. It's really a capacity issue, which is what housing elements have always been about. And it's really intended for cities to maintain that. So you're not approving lower density development or even commercial development on housing sites when it was intended to provide housing per your housing element. A change, like many of the housing laws that gave this legislation more teeth, came in 2017 with SB 166. What SB 166 did is it treats your housing element sites more like a living document. It's an ongoing thing where if you're approving development on those sites, you need to be looking at, do you still have the capacity for each income category? And if not, then you need to do something about that. So essentially what's happened with the housing element is you now have more of a living document. It's not something you update every 8 years, take it off the shelf and update it again. You have annual reporting, which will also be coming to you soon. And along with bills like SB 166, this is something that's involved in your day-to-day decision making. So you're really doing a lot of tracking and having to be accountable to state agencies overseeing housing. So what must cities do to comply if they are in a no net loss situation? You essentially need to make findings, which is something we have been doing with our housing projects that have been coming forward to Planning Commission and City Council lately. And you need to quantify what the remaining levels are in your housing element when you make that finding. Do you have an adequate supply or do you not? If a shortfall in any income category is found, you then either concurrently or within 180 days, essentially 180 days, you need to identify new housing element sites and or upzone existing housing element sites that you may have. Now, that second bullet gets tougher for Cupertino since 70% of our housing element sites are already at a 50 unit per acre minimum or higher. One other word, and we'll touch a little bit more on it. The 180 days, that began for us the end of last year in mid-December. And I would have to say the consensus of being able to identify and rezone sites in 180 days is pretty much next to impossible for any city. But I think the state's intent is that when you find yourself in this situation, it's something that you need to start correcting as quickly as possible. Why did Cupertino get this deficit? Well, one of the reasons, in addition to not having a large buffer for low and moderate income, is we have gotten a lot of housing development. The 3 years we were working on the housing element, we didn't have very many applications. Since 2024, we have now over 15 housing applications. So in a sense, we've ended up in this situation because we've had housing come in and we've been approving projects, which alters what was forecasted by the housing element. The reason for this is we had some sites that had submitted preliminary applications under SB 330. That essentially allows you to lock in lower density. So where we had sites in the housing element identified at 50 or 65 units minimum per acre, developers could lock in, say, 20 for townhome developments. So this created, an obvious shortfall in total units and affordability. The second bullet, again, the BMR requirements is sort of an ongoing issue where your RHNA is requiring over half your units to be affordable, but your BMR will not allow you to do that. You can't really exceed 20 without having the state focus on why you would be exceeding 20%. So that's not unique to Cupertino, but it's an issue. Even another issue we have is that where there's a density range, say at the townhome level, of 20 to 35 units per acre, the level we typically see them coming in at is right at 20. So even where you have projects that are compliant with the housing element, not coming in under SB 330, they tend to be at the lowest edge of the development range. And we only have one project, which we noted in the last bullet, on a housing element site, that is coming in, that is using a density bonus and actually providing a significant number of density bonus units. So that's kind of the one anomaly where we're getting much more than expected. We do have other sites, such as the Mary Avenue project, which met exactly what was required in the housing element. And we have one other site with the teacher housing, location north of Valco, that similarly should come in right on point. But in general, most of the townhome development, which is the vast majority of what we get, we tend to be losing total units, and the number of affordable units is less than projected. The last point, pipeline projects, just to cover that again, those were projects identified in the housing element that had already been approved but not built. The most significant site by far in terms of housing numbers was Valco, or the Rise, which initially had a little over 2,400 units, 50% of them being in the low income category. Through subsequent modifications, one being approved recently, the number of units, for instance, just dropped from 890 low income units to 356. So it isn't just pending development projects, but because this was a significant pipeline project, and Cupertino was very reliant on pipeline projects. We had over 2,600 units. Excuse my voice. That also has put us in the low income category, and it has worsened our no net loss situation. Okay, so the current status, as I said, we found ourselves in a no net loss situation in the middle of December, just in the moderate income category. Currently now, in particular with the recent Velco modification, we are in a situation where both low and moderate, we cannot make the finding. So as I said, also, we have 180 days per state law to correct this. That is not a date that we're going to be able to make, but as I said, this is something that the city does need to address as soon as possible. Okay, so this kind of daunting looking table, I can just walk you through this. The first row again is our RHNA that shows the total on the right. The second row is what our housing element had. Again, we had looked at that in an earlier slide. And the third row is the surplus we had anticipated, which we've also seen. The next two rows focus on projects we have already taken in action. So the fourth row is what the housing element was forecasting we would get, and the fifth row is what we actually got. So that results in the fifth column, where you can see there is a deficit of 327 in the low category and 22 in the moderate. Even our above moderate went from a little over 1,000 units to now a little over 800, but that's still a significant buffer. But I think this illustrates right now we have that issue in both the low and moderate category. And it's, again, largely based on because our housing element went from this thing frozen in time to where we've now actually had development that we have approved. That in addition to the Velco modification. So it's essentially, we've adjusted to the realities of the market with what's getting approved. Okay, the timeline, again, we had 180 days from the middle of December, which would be the middle of June, to actually correct this. One of the issues with that is that you would not only have to find the sites, you would have to rezone them. Rezoning is a legislative act that would require going to the Planning Commission and approval by the City Council. And this is what we're talking about really is an amendment to our housing element or a general plan amendment, which is not exempt from CEQA. So really the major variables that affect the timeline, as quickly as you want to move on this, we do have issues like community outreach and noticing, which is always a big concern on a project like this, that people are made aware of what's happening, which sites are being affected. And also any project subject to CEQA. CEQA is pretty much your critical path. You can only go as fast as your CEQA process. Right now, it's uncertain what path we would take. This could probably be anything from an addendum to the existing general plan EIR to a standalone EIR. So we're looking at timelines that are probably more like a year to a year plus based on that. We're in the really early stages, so I don't want to throw out any hard dates because there's no way I can guarantee those. Strategies to come up with how we find the additional capacity and additional housing sites. I think the most basic one would be to focus on what we really did in the first place, would be to identify sites that come in at a higher density, say 50 dwelling units per acre or more, and look at sites along major transportation corridors. We had Assembly Bill 2011 went into effect in 2023. The city has never received an application under that bill. What that bill did as a refresher was allow housing development on commercially zoned sites at densities tied to the corridor capacity. Could be either 40 or 60 units per acre. The reason that has been infrequently used is because of all the conditions that came with it and other conditions in terms of the labor involved that was going to increase costs of construction. So Cupertino has never gotten an AB 2011 project, but the goal of trying to put higher densities along the corridors just makes a lot more sense for the city to be able to comply with its RHNA. The other thing having more dense developments along the corridors does is it keeps development out of neighborhoods. I think we have seen so far in the last year and a half is that where we've had development in neighborhoods, which even at a townhome density, it has tended to get a fair amount of opposition, and the unit count is invariably going to be lower for townhomes. So that would be another reason to try to keep development along the main corridors. It also just requires fewer sites. Higher density means less acreage. Another upside is where we can get development that, say, are going to be modest size or smaller apartments. We have a much greater ability to claim those units as affordable as either low or moderate income. Right now, with a typical townhome development, you're looking at 2,000 or more square feet, often 3 and 4 bedrooms, which pretty much means anything that is not a required BMR, one of the 20%, the city is not going to be able to justify that it qualifies as an affordable unit. We would, on the other hand, if we were to get development that's higher density with smaller units, be able to say they're affordable by design. Whether they're restricted outright through a deed, you can make the argument, certainly by justifying the rents, that these units would qualify. So we're not always having a deficit happen each time we approve a project. One other issue citywide that we're aware of is by putting more development along commercial corridors, this could impact existing commercial centers. So this could be an opportunity to identify commercial centers where you want to retain the retail component. It would be the one time to do it, since we're going to be going through a rezoning action in order to address no net loss. We could fold that into the process as well. This was a map we're just recycling from looking at what was eligible under AB 2011. The sites shown in black were housing element sites, with the exception on the one in the upper right-hand corner, which is the Hamptons, which is not. But the sites shown in gray would all be potential sites that could be upzoned. I'm not saying all of them, but looking at those areas rather than going into the city's neighborhoods may be a better approach to being able to identify sites. And the last topic before I end is just looking at the budget. The current estimate to do this amendment to the housing element to address no net loss is running about $350,000 to $500,000, the majority of which would be costs related to CEQA. And again, the reason there's a range is because the CEQA process itself could vary, which is essentially going to have a longer process that's more labor intensive. And we are looking at what other options there may be to cover this cost. We're just not sure what there may be now, but the cost estimate itself within that range is what's looking to be pretty realistic at this time. And with that, I do not have anything in addition. So we don't have anything on that says questions or feedback, but I'm sure you have a lot of both. So I'm happy to try to address them as they come up.
All right, thank you, Luke. So we never had a discussion about no net loss before, even though this law has been in place since 2017, because it was being based off our prior RHNA numbers.
Correct. I think some of the slides we had on the housing element, we did reference no net loss. But I think with all the other information that was in there, I think when we were discussing why it was important to have a buffer, we had cited Senate Bill 166 and that being a factor. So it was in there. I just think so much of 2023 and 24, with the housing element being late, the goal was to get it certified. And this is sort of a post-certification problem. I think it's one that we thought we were going to have to deal with at some point. It's just happened a lot sooner because the city has received a lot of development applications, and several of those have already gone to hearing and been approved.
Okay, thank you. Could you please repeat like a map of strategies before we get into our clarifying questions?
Yeah, I think overall, let me try to get back. What we've looked at is, again, if you do higher density, most of the sites in the housing element, again, 70% of them were 50 units or more per acre. I think sticking with that strategy or almost going exclusively with higher density sites, it enables you to get that density along the major corridors. You have more of your transportation network with what that is in this area. You have more of that there to support higher density housing. It also just involves less land. It avoids having to try to consider putting higher density out into what may be single family neighborhoods where it's likely to get considerably more opposition. I think it just overall expedites the process. So much of the state laws and the regional planning has looked at streamlining and expediting development along major corridors as well. So in terms of like VMT, we know most of like adding housing along major corridors, you don't have a VMT impact, which could occur the further you get off those corridors. But in a sense, yeah, I think it is more palatable to the community and something we can do more quickly and is a more efficient use of land, frankly. And we may get more affordable units out of the higher density than what we're seeing at the typical townhome development.
Okay, so what happens if some of these projects that use the SB 330 mechanism, if they withdraw that and they come back and say, well, our market conditions have changed and we actually are able to make the higher density work, then we would have gone through this exercise for nothing. Is that accurate?
It could be, but unfortunately we have the law to deal with, and in a 180-day time frame. My conversations with people who do work on housing elements have all pretty much said 180 days is an unrealistic time frame, but to not address the no net loss situation at some point in time, you have to address it because it's a state law as it relates to housing elements.
Okay, and it seems like it's going to run into our next housing element, which we'll be looking at in how long before we start the next one, and are you anticipating a ridiculous set of numbers to be thrown our way again?
Your last question, I hope not, because the capacity is kind of reaching what it is. It was difficult enough this time. Since the next cycle is going to run 2031, we would probably want to start that no later than 2029, possibly 2028, in terms of looking at the 7th cycle. I honestly can't guess what the numbers are going to be. I've heard different things.
Okay. Make sure we get a consultant early and beat the rush. All right. Okay, I've spoken long enough on this item. Do we have any council clarifying questions on this? We are up at 6:30 at this time, and we need to be wrapped up by 6:45 for the regular session. Councilmember Fruin, I see you have your hand raised.
Yeah, so just a couple things to start off here. I wanted to caution that though you could certainly see a situation where someone has an existing application that's been approved at a lower density, even if that person were to come back with a new application on the same site, HCD and the statutes themselves presume a certain affordability level based upon the density that you have ascribed to the property. So despite that fact, when that project actually comes forward, it probably won't match the affordability level that the law is presuming. So you're still likely to wind up in this situation. It's one of the points of disconnect between the planning process inside the housing element and what we can require in inclusionary and what might be realistic to expect from just 100% affordable housing production. So, with that, it only underscores the importance of the buffer. It's one of the reasons why I've long advocated for a much larger one, because you don't want to wind up in this situation. And I would hate for us to be repeating this process again, so I think that we should be mindful of that so that we're not back here once more fairly soon. Has anyone on staff also given consideration to, given that we are concerned about retention of retail, the new commune DTLA LLC decision that basically says you can't use an overlay?
I've not considered that as yet. I mostly wanted to put that out there because I know the retail discussion has been sort of on the horizon.
Yeah.
And as we look at commercial sites, I think, as you know, most of our commercial properties right now, a lot of them allow commercial or residential development. So that exercise would be largely taking the res off the zoning.
Yeah, and we don't know what kind of objections we'll get to that. You could still have an overlay for it, but you wouldn't be able to count it toward the housing element. That's really the only problem.
Right.
However, if a project came forward, obviously that's going to be counted in our APR.
Right. And I should say, of the numbers we showed too, is we have approved a number of developments on non-housing element sites. And one approved and one pending includes a housing element site and non-housing element sites that are adjacent to it. So we can get credit for those. And of course, through the annual report, we will, because we've approved those units. But the slides I just showed tonight were really focused just on our priority housing sites. So the picture may look a little worse, and we will get credit for those, but it's mostly to highlight we are dealing with this issue sooner than we thought.
Yeah. One of the things I just would also underscore from that same court decision is that the court did ratify that the mixed use carve out in the law is still viable. There is section 65-583.2 sub A sub 2 of housing element law. So you can still have mixed use. It has to simply meet certain criteria. So if we are going to continue to have mixed use, that our housing element sites, I would just encourage us to make sure it's meeting that standard so that we don't wind up with a problem later on.
Right. Yeah, I mean, of our housing element of when I said they were about equally divided, we actually forecasted more total units in the mixed use than in the residential only areas.
Yeah. And then just for the sake of everyone's recollection, we actually had a buffer of 37% in the fifth cycle. So we are lower on this score than what we were last time. I don't have anything else for right now.
Great. Thank you. I do have a quick question. You mentioned EIR. We don't have an EIR unless you're going back to 2014. We have environmental assessment. So what would you be amending?
It would be the 2014 EIR. The environmental assessment is, and again, I don't want to say what we've determined. I'm just in having conversations about what we could do. The environmental assessment is not something you could tier off of or do an addendum or an amendment off of, because while it looks a lot like an EIR, it's not an EIR.
Okay.
So we would have to go back to a different document.
Okay, thank you. And lastly, I'm going to go to Vice Mayor Chow, bring it up for public comment because we are running close to our allotted time. Vice Mayor?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the clarification that the table here only includes housing element sites, not the actual number. But what we do care about is the actual number, whether it's from housing or non-housing element sites, right? And also, many of these are because of they submitted the SB 330 application before the housing element to lock in a lower density from our previous plan. How many of those SB 330 with lower density are left? That's
how many are left? I believe they're done.
They're done, right?
Yes.
So anything that's coming in the future, supposedly they should follow the minimum density.
Actually, there is one more. I misspoke. We do have one more pending. But yes, we are not in that situation anymore because we have a certified housing element. You couldn't lock in a lower density on a housing element site. So that is correct.
That has nothing to do with certified or not. I think SB 330 does allow them to lock in the current zoning while we are planning for the future one. It has nothing to do with whether we have certified or not.
Correct, but for the sites that have been upzoned
Yeah.
now, you would have to meet that standard.
And then for the Wolf Road project, which is that approved or not?
The Wolf Road teacher housing is not approved.
It's not. So that's supposed to provide a lot more moderate and low income. And they have two phases. My understanding is the current phase is mostly moderate and low income, and they have a second phase that may have more low income. So how would that come into the picture? Would that help us with the numbers, or would they just meet the density?
It would be similar to Mary Avenue because the assumption on that site was that it would be 100% income restricted to low and moderate. So we would essentially be doing what the housing element anticipated, just like Mary Avenue.
So we would just meet the
Right. Mary Avenue was 40.
expectation, not going get more
Correct.
units. So is it possible that we reach out to the county to get more units on those sites for more low income?
I would assume that project is pretty well.
This
Yeah, 'cause we
they
had
still
had
have the second phase that's still being planned.
Vice Mayor?
Okay,
Yeah, we had
So-
conversations with them earlier about doing
Yeah,
a
it's-
more dense project.
that's okay for the.
Okay, so I'm sorry, Vice Mayor, I'm going to have to cut you off there.
Okay.
We're going to go to public comment now. We're going to limit it to 90 seconds per speaker. Do we have any public comments, Madam City Clerk?
We do. At this time, we have 3 requests to speak in person, and I see 2 hands raised virtually. So as a reminder, members of the public wishing to speak regarding an item shall submit a request to speak or raise their hand virtually within the first 9 minutes of the start of public comment, or before the public comment period is closed, whichever comes first. So we will move to in-person. Please
Hold on
welcome.
one moment.
Oh, sorry.
I would like a recommendation from the city manager and city attorney. It looks like we're not going to be able to complete this item. What do you suggest? I don't think we're going to be able to get to direction with that number of speakers.
Are you suggesting reducing the public comment period or asking if we should continue until we complete?
Continue until we complete?
I think that we should.
Okay. So I
Point of
would
order. At
also
some
like
point, I would like to comment.
Pardon? I would like to reduce the public comment to 1 minute per person. We have a very packed agenda. We need to really get moving. All right, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor. So we will welcome Greg, followed by Jennifer Griffin, followed by Peggy Griffin. Welcome, Greg.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. My name is Greg Endem. I represent the ownership of Marina Plaza Shopping Center and the adjacent retail parcel located at 10145 North De Anza. I'm here this evening to offer comments on the staff report, as well as reiterate what I had sent in the letter to each of you today, as well as staff. The Marina ownership of Marina Plaza would request that their property be upzoned to 60 to 80 units per acre. Because I have limited amount of time, I won't go through the history of the property. There was a prior approval 2 years ago. The interest rates exploded, construction costs went up, and it doesn't make sense. So we're trying to figure out how do we do something that makes sense. We have a plan among the many that we have considered that was for 300 units. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Next, we have Jennifer.
I'm going to start out by saying I just noticed that Nancy Skinner wrote both SB 166 and SB 330. This woman has been out of office for 1 year. We are currently plagued with both of her bills. She wrote no net loss in 2017, which Jerry Brown signed, and then she wrote SB 330 just recently, several years ago, and we've got the 7 retail killing townhouse projects. Because they're high income projects, they're forcing us to no net loss, which Nancy Skinner wrote that bill. What the hell is, what is going on here? Weiner and Wicks wrote AB 2011, which we're plagued with too. Is this graft? What is going on? This needs to be investigated, and I don't want to spend $350K to go through no net loss. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Next, we have Peggy Griffin. Welcome, Peggy.
Hi. Couple things. Protect the retail, use this opportunity to do so. Limit the commercial corridors to just De Anza Boulevard and Stevens Creek. Foothill has homes on it, and so does Stelling. So that would be a big impact for those two streets. Think about max unit size. We've got these enormous units. If we limited the max, maybe you could get more units in. Increase the in lieu fees for the BMR, and also, I don't know if you can do this, but for owner, go from 20% to 10% if they would do all very low or something like that. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Peggy. Mayor, we'll move to the request to speak virtually. I am seeing 2 hands raised. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you. Hello?
We can hear you.
Okay. I still saw 8 seconds on there, so I thought, okay. So yes, please protect retail. It's critical. It's been brought up more times than, well, by more people in all the housing element discussions. That was a big deal for everybody, and I'm sure that has not changed. In fact, it's probably gotten more important because we are losing retail already. And I mean, this is statewide, face it, it's not just us. It's a mess. We never should have been put in this situation. No city should have. It's so frustrating, I can't even think of my words. So now I understand why Target is probably the reason that the Target site is for sale. They're probably planning ahead to sell it to somebody that wants to get rid of retail and do however many townhouses they need to do to make themselves happy and rich. I'm babbling.
Thank you, Lisa.
Great way to end.
Next, we have San Rao.
Good evening, Mayor Moore and council members. On an item of this importance, I don't think you should be rushing this through like this. I recommend you continue the item and bring it back to a main session. What did we not learn from the previous housing element deliberations where we cut debate short, we cut community engagement short, and 1 minute is simply not enough time. Having said that, I do want to say that you should look at what other cities have done and what are strategies that can hold developers to these housing units so that they do not try and reduce their BMR units. There are things you can do, such as developer agreements or affordable housing agreements. That's something to look into. There are other things you can do around stronger ordinances that really prevent the reduction in the RHNA inventory. But most importantly, I think you need to not delay on this item. We've been asking for this at the Planning Commission for 2 months now, and this really needs to be heard at the Planning Commission and rushed through. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Mayor, that concludes the request to speak on this. Let me double check that this one is not it. Mahesh, are you wanting to speak on this item number 2 at the special meeting or item number 2 in the regular meeting? Mahesh, are you wanting to speak on this item or a number 2 on the regular meeting? Okay, thank you. And this concludes the request to speak.
All right, thank you. I do see, Councilmember Wong, your hand has been raised.
I will keep it brief. Is that okay?
Please.
Okay. I just want to correct some assertions here. We're here because of the large numbers of the buffer and the carelessness in allowing a 4X number from the previous cycle. Let's be clear here. The market has also shown that these homes are not wanted by the public. That's why they're building townhomes instead of the Soviet-style planned economy approach that has failed. RHNA is built on bad numbers. The last city council who did not advocate for lower RHNA numbers put us here. This is unconstitutional. It's an unfunded mandate, and there's no due process, and there's lack of home rule. So we need to do a couple things. We need to reduce our bus line service to protect our retail areas from being upzoned and abused with transit-oriented policies. We need to challenge the RHNA number methodology, and we should also consider becoming a charter city. We could also take a approach by upzoning everything to a ridiculous number that no developer can build to that number, because that's just not what the market designed. These forced plans aren't working. And I think we really need to look at those other strategies at the same time as we may consider upzoning in some areas. But this is really a result of really poor state planning. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Wong. So what we're looking for is direction to staff. And I do want to mention that there is a 27-acre property apartment complex that traded hands last year in 2025. So Rock Point Group now owns the villages. It's 110 units built in 1964. And as I said, 27 acres, and most all of it is only two-story. So it's very, very low density currently, and it might be good to reach out to Rock Point and see if they would be interested moving forward. So the kind of direction, well, your recommended action seems to be that we look at these other sites that you've suggested. Is that correct?
Yes, just so we can get an overall strategy of what types of sites should we focus on.
Okay, so you're looking for the council to agree to look at those, and if there are other diamonds in the rough, like the villages, that might be something that can accommodate because of its size, that we would reach out if there's any others of that number of acres, perhaps, rather than holding off on that until the next RHNA cycle. It might be timely to do that now. So I do see one hand raised here. Vice Mayor?
I remember that there was a property owner who reached out last year from the Bob Road because the city reached out to them last time, a few years ago. So, but then I understand that area, it's zoned for industrial. So are those sites suitable for residential? Should we reconsider? I see that you some of the gray area that you have marked for that map also is along Bob Road. So is that something that should be considered?
Yeah, I think the situation we were in the housing element update, it's going to be, is there interest in development? Because HCD is always going to want to know, is it feasible that this site's going to develop? So if there is owner interest, that's always a good indicator. It's something we will be asked. The vast majority of our housing element sites this cycle had owner interest. Not all of them, but most of them by far. So if there were, that's something we could look at.
So we should reach out to the property owners to find if there's any owner interest?
We should be reaching out, I think, citywide, as we did last time, to try to determine if there's owner interest. We have, in the last couple months, talked to property owners who have, we had one speaking tonight, and we've had others that have come forward to say they would be interested in having their sites upzoned. And actually would have some viable plans for development.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. So it looks like we have some interest in seeing if we can preserve retail within the city, look at what other cities have done with a similar problem, and is there any potential that we can have a maximum unit size? I think that has become kind of an issue when we're seeing things over 2,000 square feet. When you're looking at the dwelling units per acre, these can end up being enormous projects if there is no unit size requirement. So next it's Councilmember Mohan, Councilmember Fruin, and be aware that we are 6 minutes into the regular meeting. Thank you.
Right. I had a quick question for the staff. Since we do have this 180-day restriction, what would, and knowing that we cannot solve this problem in 180 days, is good intentions, is a letter outlining our strategies. Would that be satisfactory to HCD?
I think our first step would be to get a consultant on board, and we would need to have those conversations with HCD. I think the positive thing is we have been documenting in our staff reports, recognizing we are in this position. I think in the first conversations we would be having with HCD, we need to be demonstrating that we're trying to correct this. My read on 180 days is like that's a next to impossible time frame for any city to meet, to actually identify and rezone sites, even outside of CEQA. And when you factor CEQA in, that's just not feasible. But I do think being in this situation, which I don't know the number of other cities that are, this is not an isolated to Cupertino incident, though. You do need to show you're addressing the situation and trying to identify more sites so you don't remain in this position.
So intent may be sufficient for now.
I think so. I can never answer on behalf of a state agency, but having had to talk to HCD staff for a period of time, that's usually where these things start, is there's rules, but there's flexibility to them. But it was obviously important to point this out to council so we can start addressing the situation as soon as possible. And as with the housing element, we would very much need an experienced consultant to help us through this process expeditiously.
Thank you.
Okay, so I believe that would need to be part of our direction to staff, is that you hire a consultant to help us out, and also, of course, that you keep communicating with HCD. Council Member Fruin?
Yeah, that was actually my next question, was what conversations to date have you had with HCD?
None as of yet.
Okay. All right. I mean, we might be able to expect HCD to forbear knowing that we're working on it, but I'll just point out that a private party could also sue the city to invalidate our housing element. So we're not completely out of the woods just because HCD is acquiescing. And then just for clarification, a larger buffer is better here than a smaller one, yes?
I think we learned that lesson
Yes.
because we're
Okay.
back tonight.
Just want to make sure that that's absolutely clear, because we don't want to be in the same position, a few months down the road. I think we've got a good opportunity to fix some things on a longer term basis.
Okay, thank you. And it may be that, offline, that if we know of some other properties, that we will offer those suggestions rather than trying to come up with those at this time. So far, I'm not hearing any opposition to the direction to staff that I've laid out. Vice Mayor?
Also support that I think I've been saying over I think I support that we should limit the unit size. I think I've been saying that over the years. What we are seeing, 2-3 bedroom, that's 3,000 square foot, when there could be 1,000 square foot could comfortably fit 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom, even 4 bedroom. And so but how would that be viewed by HCD? I'm not sure. Could that be considered as BMR? But also, I think we need a smaller senior flat, so that seniors could downsize within Cupertino to a smaller flat. Is it possible to have 2-bedroom senior flat with separate caretaker unit, for example, that could be considered a separate below market rate unit? Would that combination help us with the units and also provide the needs for the community? Yeah.
Right, thank you. So does staff feel like you have adequate direction on this item?
Yes, Mayor. The only thing I want to clarify is currently we have a work program item that says preserve retail, and it's very limited to the ballot measure. But I think from what I'm hearing today, you want us to look into other options as well when we come back. So thank you.
Yes, thank you. Okay, and
I
with
would
that...
like to add one quick thing. I would like to add one quick
Councilmember
thing.
Wong, please.
Can we make sure that we look into how we can enforce developer agreements when these things are signed, so we're not in a situation like what just happened on the Valco property?
Is that clear?
That may be a legal question, but I will take that offline with the attorney.
Okay, thank you. With that, this special meeting of the Cupertino City Council is adjourned. we will, do we need a 5-minute break before the next, or we keep going? So we will then proceed with the regular meeting afterwards. Thank you.